Are you like typing?
Awesome, cool. So we are live and online. So good afternoon, everyone. Those that are watching online, thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Renee. As you guys can clearly see, you won't be able to see my face today, but it is a pleasure to have you guys all today here for our monthly Women Speaker Series. We know under the situation, COVID situation, and everything that's going on right now, it is a little bit difficult for people to communicate with each other. But we're trying to do this as smoothly as possible. And once again, thank you all for joining us. Today, we want to give a very, very amazing introduction to our speaker, Chetna Sehgal. She was actually going to join us a couple months ago for our Women in Tech Week event. Unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, we had to postpone it, but she's able to join us today. A little introduction of Chetna. Chetna is a San Francisco based partner with Accenture. She leads application services for Accenture, Accenture specific communication. Um, I want to do a little quick transition so you're able to do a better introduction and give yourself, let people know who you are. So without further ado, here is Chetna Sehgal.
And everyone, I really welcome you to our session today. As Renee mentioned, I'm part of Accenture. I've been there 24 years and I run our technology work in the West for our communication media high tech clients. And I'm really thrilled to be here today. I have to say, before we get started, I realize our hearts are heavy. And I know we're going through a national crisis. We in America are not in a good place, but I know the session is not about that. However, I wanted to send my positive prayers and vibes for everyone's healing. And as for COVID, again, a global crisis, again, hope everyone and their loved ones are keeping well. The topic for today is leadership, and really, what better time to develop and show leadership than when we need it most, which is during a crisis. So we'll get started on our conversation. I will keep it a little bit interactive, so hopefully that'll kind of allow you to glean more from this conversation we're having. The first thing we're going to do is, if we could move on to the first slide here, which basically gives us a definition of leadership. I will admit, I looked at many, websites, and I looked at the dictionary, and the definitions I got there were act of leading, or a state or position of being a leader, or leader was someone who leads. So rather circular definitions there. But I cobbled together some of the nuggets from these definitions, and you see, it's really about the art of motivating a group of people, and you want to achieve a common goal. And the other interesting thing about all of this is it doesn't say you need to have a formal title. It doesn't say you need to have a team to lead. As a matter of fact, many of the folks in history that I personally consider iconic leaders did not have a job title, unless for Mahatma Gandhi, you count father of the nation, right? He started in the Congress later on. So point being, we can all be leaders anywhere, at work, in our communities, in your niece's school, in your household, in your life. So I kind of want to make sure that this topic, folks realize, is applicable to everyone. The other thing I would say is the way I've constructed this session is I will talk about 5 leadership themes, basically characteristics I believe a good leader has or builds. And I'll talk about it in the context of life and business. I'm a huge fan of Susie Orman. Those of you who don't know her, she's a financial guru, but she never just talks finance. She talks about it in the context of life and our situations, because we are whole beings. So today, when I talk about leadership, it's going to be in the context of business as well as us as individuals. All right, with that context, we'll move on to the next slide, and we'll get started on our first theme. Before I get started on this theme, I'm going to give you a quick story I read from Chicken Soup for the Soul, which I read many years ago, and it really stuck, and I love the story. So basically, the story goes like this. A farmer is walking in his farm, and he finds this big egg. He takes the egg, and he carries it over to the chicken coop and places it along with the other chickens and their eggs. So over time, the egg hatches, and out comes an eagle. Now, this eagle grows up with the other chickens. It clucks like a chicken, it pecks on the grain like a chicken, and life goes on. So one day, the eagle sees this big shadow on the ground. So he turns up to the sky, and then he says, wow, what is this amazing, majestic bird? This bird is soaring through the sky effortlessly. And, it looks amazing. So he turns to his chicken friend and says, who is that? And the chicken friend says, oh, that is the magnificent eagle. It's the king of all birds, the creature of the gods. He belongs in the sky. We are simply mortal creatures of this earth. So the eagle looks up wistfully at the other eagle in the sky, and then turns back and starts pecking on his grain. And this way, the eagle lived and died a chicken, because that's who he believed he was. I love the story. Very powerful. I know farm animals and all, but the point is, what are the things that are causing you to impose limitations on yourself? And I realize life sometimes deals a complicated hand. COVID is so unprecedented, and our business is impacted everywhere. So let me also touch upon that COVID reality in the context of this theme. So let's look at our businesses right now. They're starting to open, and the first immediate challenges have to be addressed. One of the things is, how do you ensure that the workforce has a safe and secure workplace? So in many cases, do we take that challenge as an opportunity to reinvent? And who says we have to go back to the prior business models, right? We could leverage remote working for select areas to help our balance sheets. We could have what we call an elastic cost structure, so we can kind of control that. And then we can also leverage technology to remove the limitations that we might be imposing on ourselves. I had a 4-hour session, design thinking session with one of my clients. It was, I think, 2 weeks back, and it was around the maturity of their sourcing processes. It could be any topic, but that's what we discussed. And we had around 15 people on the call, and we used Mural and Menti for real-time collaboration. And I tell you, I thought that session was more powerful than the ones I've done in person. And talk about the effective use of time and money, right? Half the team would have had to fly to hold the session, etc. So we are hitting a new reset point, a new reality. And those that are creating these new models, these new technology offerings, and those that are embracing them are the leaders. They are ripping off the limitations and then some. Let's look at other limitations that the businesses are facing today. And what are the leaders doing today? Our businesses are getting disrupted, and one has to ask, okay, how does technology help? And today's organizations are not doing those big bang transformational moves in one go. I'm used to those, the big changes in the organization. COVID is making them do what we call point solutions, right? So you've got a gap. You've got to have a solution to fill that gap given COVID. You could have a gap in your supply chain resiliencies, right? And then people are creating what we call digital twin to answer where are the point solutions needed. And what that basically means is you're replicating real life digitally, not one part in Excel, one on paper. It's end to end, so you can see what your gaps are. And when you know where your gaps are, you can say, okay, what do I do to fill them? Do I do hyper automation? And then, they also look at security. And we know a lot of bad actors are coming up to exploit the situation. So again, the leaders are looking at this as an opportunity to redefine security, redefine resilience. And customer service is not like customer, or rather service as a remedy. That you're fixing something. It's become service as an engagement, where basically you're pulling your customers to become more loyal and even more dependent on you. So again, life is getting completely disrupted. And I bring all of this up because I really see many leaders making lemonades out of these lemons, or mojitos out of the limes, whatever analogy works better. The second resonates with me better right now. But a lot of realities will be technology driven. So folks like yourselves who are into technology are in the driver's seat in a very big way. So we have to remove our mental shackles, and your leadership and looking past what cannot work into what actually will be the key here. All right, enough of self-imposed limitations. We're going to move on to the next slide here, and I'm going to make this one a little bit interactive. So let me give you context. So what you see there is, Gandhi. I've talked about him once already. I just absolutely enamored by what he was able to accomplish. Personally, I'm enamored by that. So he was a leader. He had a vision. He achieved it by motivating others. He inspired others. He aligned people. He took risks, and he left a legacy. Now that's an iconic leader, right? But we have leaders around us all the time that we look up to. It could be your neighbor. It could be your mother. It could be anyone. So what I'm going to ask you right now is basically to think about what are some of the characteristics of a great leader, and just write them out. And I'm going to ask Renee if you could give directions on what people need to do to write this out, and just let's have people write out what they think is a good characteristic of a great leader.
Yes, so for that, guys, we're gonna make this a little bit more interactive. If you guys are seeing the YouTube in the description, there is a link to a Slido. So you're able to click on the link. You should be able to go to the poll settings, or little poll tab, and you should be able to see a poll that comes up. So if you're seeing that right now, Chetna, it's actually being populated by some of the students.
So while folks are typing, Renee, I'm going to need your help because I am unable to. I see the poll section, but I'm not seeing the answers.
Oh, okay,
Can you-
yes, sure
oh,
thing. Give
sorry.
me one quick second and let me do
Okay.
this. Yes, getting responses from all the people here. Let me
Wonderful.
just, let's do this little transition right here. And while this goes on, let me show you what some of the students are saying.
Wonderful.
right here.
Awesome. All right, we're going to start reading. Oh, I love it. Okay, leaders lead by example. Listening, helping, motivation. A good leader is passionate, courageous, willing to get their hands dirty. Empathy, help others to grow. Lead by example. Awareness, patience, strength, caring attitude, ability to change and learn. A good leader should have strong communication skills, empathy, confidence. I tell you all, I love these. And frankly, I don't even know if you need this presentation because you got it way better covered than I would have articulated this. So really, really great points. And one thing I like about these points is that they really beautifully show that there's no one mold for a leader, right? And so I would ask you to kind of, since you've invested the time in kind of being here with our conversation here, think about which of these characteristics do you want to build in yourself. I'm talking about 5 today, but you've got some amazing ones listed there. And just think about, I like humility. I'm seeing that now, it's scrolling to the top. And again, think about which ones you want to build in yourself. And ask yourself, if you cannot, why not? Is that a limitation that you're imposing on yourself when you say, I can't build that characteristic? And by the way, I strongly believe leaders are made, so we can build some of these. All right, wonderful. Thank you for kind of, getting our juices flowing here. And we'll go ahead and jump back to the presentation if we could, Renee. And we're going to go to the slide that talks about theme number 2, which is continuous learning. And I will say, while Renee is bringing that up, let's see, there we go. Rumi is my favorite poet. And I absolutely love this quote. If you're irritated by every rub, how will your mirror be polished? And the first part, therefore, about being a leader is continuous learning. And the first part in my books, continuous learning is being open to feedback. It can be positive areas as well as areas for improvement. I tell you, when I look back at the past 24 years in my current organization, I'm simply blown away by how much I've learned via feedback. And it's not just from people who are senior to me, it's also my team members, etc. And again, learning and feedback is not single faceted, right? Right now, some of you might be focused on learning the amazing techniques of coding, right? But as you go through life, you will never sit in a vacuum and do something such as code, etc. You will be connecting your experiences to solve real world problems. You will be navigating through complex environments, tough organizations to get what you want. You might be working to get selected for a dream project or get funding for a project. You will require multiple skills and the leadership qualities to make that happen. And that holds whether you've got 0 people reporting to you or got 1,000 people reporting to you in a global organization. And in technology, we talk about failing fast, right? Fail fast. It's considered a positive attribute. That's the very foundation of agile methodology of MVPs. So the idea is to learn, to get quicker feedback. And why can't we apply the same concept to ourselves as leaders, right? Try things out, whether it's personally, in your products, in your applications, and fail fast, and then course correct, right? So I would say, again, taking the feedback and not taking things personally. Basically, I love, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. Just kind of, it's okay to get that feedback. It actually is really value add. So that's one facet of continuous learning. The other is basically content. Knowledge is power. So I'm going to kind of pivot us back to our current reality. And you look at how our current businesses are working, right? They need more real-time decisions, which means they need real-time data and analytics. I've already talked about system resilience. That becomes really critical nowadays. And when suddenly you've got all your retail volume, say, your clothing company, flowing through your data center or the cloud, we're talking a different ballgame. The cloud strategy and journeying to cloud, it becomes very pivotal. And that's why you see the MAGs, right? The Microsofts, the Amazons, the Alibabas, the Googles honing into that play of cloud. So technology is not just that glamorous front-end chatbot, but it's about how we create a sustainable business model in the new. And this business model ideally should support touchless sales and hyper personalization. I don't know about you, but as an end consumer, I have basically expecting that from all the companies I interact with, whether I'm buying clothes or if I'm buying medicine online. And the question becomes, in terms of the context, going back to continuous learning, do you have those skills, the technical, the creative, the business skills, the ability to navigate through complexity, to be that leader, to forge your way in the new? If not, create and develop them. And that's what leaders do. They continually grow, they continually learn, they take their organizations forward in the face of the unexpected. And one of the principals in one of my high schools, I've been to multiple schools, used to say, be good at what you do. Doesn't matter what you choose to do. So she was all about knowledge is power. Now, another point I want to touch upon here is what we've been talking about. We've been talking about elastic workforces for a while, and we've been talking about workforce of the future for a while. Well, the future is now. The skills our teams in technology need are way different. And I should say drum roll, when I coded in COBOL 24 years ago. Yes, I did. And we did not spin up an environment in Amazon then. We had to wait for our infrastructure guys to get us what we needed. And it's so liberating in today's world that our focus can be on less of the mundane activities and more on the glamorous ones, right? We are going through an SRE-led talent transformation. We need full stack engineers. We need to focus on MVP-driven continuous improvement. And we can leverage existing technologies and create new cases. I love the fact that you can take TensorFlow on the edge for use cases that support social distancing. And because it's on the edge, you're protecting privacy. And it's TensorFlow, so you can kind of ascertain if people are doing the right things. So in your lifetime, there will be additional waves of the new. And so you have to be a leader to make that pivot for yourself and your organization. And that really comes through continuous learning. All right, so you take continuous learning and you add that learning to embracing feedback. Boy, your mirror will shine like no one else's, and you will make Rumi proud. So that's about continuous learning. All right, we move on to the third theme. The third theme is about leadership is a journey and not a destination. And I really think people always are kind of expecting this, okay, again, a drum roll, that now I bequeath you leadership. There's no such thing. Leadership is a journey just like life. I love this little blurb from Alfred de Souza. I'm going to read this out to you. So it goes like this. For a long time, it seemed to me that life was about to begin, real life, but there was always some obstacle in the way. Something to be got through first, some unfinished business, time still to be served, a debt to be paid. Then life would begin. At last, it dawned on me that these obstacles were my life. I absolutely love this because honestly ask yourself, and I'm going to ask this of myself, are you on hold till you get that one opportunity or one thing you're dreaming of? And that's what Alfred de Souza is basically talking about. Once I build that one app for a cool startup, then I will, right? Once I get that job and get promoted to manager, then I will. Or once I become the CEO of my own startup, then I will. And it goes into our personal lives too. As I said, it's a journey and there's no destination we can or should wait for. I was rummaging through some old papers the other day and my son found something and he's like, what is this? And it was a leadership award I was given when I was graduating my MBA. And I still remember it had been a surprise award. My parents were all misty-eyed in the audience. And I had completely forgotten about this because this was 2.5 decades ago. But it got me thinking on why I was given the award. I was the president of the MBA Association, but there were no budgets, no formal team, nothing. It was all very scrappy, no setup. And I realized I did then what I probably cannot do now, is be a true leader. And so I'm saying this in humility. I made things happen with just the conviction and the desire to align people and the outcomes I believed in. I had no real repercussion of fear. It left me a little bit nostalgic, but also reminded me of all that goodness that I could bring back. So while I was preparing for this, session here, I also learned something that I need to imbibe back and really, really practice what I'm preaching right now. So as I said, it was, I'm saying this with all humility. All right. The other thing I want to say on this topic is, I travel a lot, or I go to a lot of clients in the Bay Area and the West Coast. And reserved parking spots for expecting mothers is a norm now. I see it in almost every client, and I specifically notice it. But that didn't used to be the case. And it was Sheryl Sandberg who took the leap and said she wanted to make it happen and paved the way. So be a leader today, do something that you believe in. I personally am blown away by the amazing leadership some school kids are showing in this time of COVID. So the point is, don't wait for anyone, anything. No asking, am I there? Am I there yet? Because if you're asking, you likely aren't. And again, now I bequeath you leadership is not true. You have to seize every moment of this journey. So that's the third theme. The next one is around people. If you could move to the next slide, theme number 4, people matter. So I strongly believe that people matter. How you take care of people and how you leverage others matters. I'm not going to do a poll, but I just want you to pause and think, who are the people whose lives you are impacting in a positive way and that those are giving back to you, or they are helping you. Just let's pause for like literally 10 seconds and think about that. And if no one comes to mind, maybe, we need to add people to that list. So as you think about that, I think of people and our relationship to them in a couple of ways. Actually, 5 ways that I've got in my mind here. One is helping others. It's good karma. They say leadership comes from a place of giving. Giving comes from a place of abundance. And I love Arianna Huffington's book, Thrive, in which she says, don't always be a go-getter, be a go-giver. So help others in your teams, use tech for good, join a nonprofit, volunteer. I genuinely feel that my life is too self-centered. So I've been on the board of the American Red Cross Silicon Valley for a few years. And I do a little bit, whatever I can. And as Rumi says, again, my favorite poet, if all you can do is crawl, start crawling. So again, helping others is one facet of it. Second, I think it's important to create your following. Whether you're younger in your career or you've been there a while, a good leader has the capabilities and networks that they can tap into, that he or she can tap into. The third one is I want to talk about how you leverage others, which is mentor versus sponsors. I think a lot of folks have mentors, and I think it's important. But I do love Sylvia Ann Hewlett's book, and you might have read it, Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor. And I'm going to read from what she's got, a blurb from there. She says, who's pulling for you? Who's got your back? Who's putting your hat in the ring? Odds are this person is not a mentor, but a sponsor. Mentors can build your self-esteem and provide a sounding board, but they're not your ticket to the top. If you're interested in fast-tracking a career, what you need is a sponsor, a senior level champion who believes in your potential and is willing to advocate for you as you pursue that next raise or promotion. So something to keep in mind. The fourth one I love, it's about not burning bridges, which, cliche, we all kind of sort of know that. But I love it because I had a client that I worked with, I'm going to say a decade and a half ago. And there was this lady, Sylvia. She'd been with the client for 30 years and was retiring. Again, this is a decade and a half ago. And I said, Sylvia, can you she was really a wise lady, loved her. And I said, what are your words of advice? And she said one thing to me. She said, don't step on anyone's feet today, as they might be attached to the butt you have to kiss tomorrow. Really powerful. So just keep that in mind. And the last thing I would say in this context is look for inspiration, right? I look to people who can inspire me, motivate me as well, so it can kind of lift me up. And again, I want to kind of pivot to the business side of this real quick, some hard business facts and why I think people matter and how we need to look at that, the lens we need to apply. Let's talk about our workforce, right? That's per people. So in March 2020, which was just when COVID was starting, Gartner looked at the semiconductor industry, right? So that's just one industry as an example in my thoughts here today. And they said that the revenue of that industry was downgraded by 55 billion due to COVID. And the annual growth went from like 12.5% to less than 1%. And this was because we would see an impact on the end use of the applications that these chips, et cetera, go into. Automotive was going back down by 24% in other areas. I think the salvation mainly was the servers. They were coming up by around 17%. But the question in all of this is, what does this do to our workforce? And more importantly, what does it do to the workforce that's remaining in this new? These workers need to learn and be comfortable with the distributed workforce tools, right? Field service will look different. Customer support will look different. And a new world for these folks, right? And it's tough. We need to make sure as leaders we leverage our network to tool ourselves and our people, our teams. Most importantly, I think people need leaders they can trust, and frankly right now they really really will follow those leaders. So you should do this genuinely, not because you need just to be good in this time, but just genuinely care for your people, have a plan for them and for yourself, and execute upon it. Invest in people. It could be yourself, your person, build your network, and in your teams. I strongly believe, despite mind boggling technological advancements, any which way you look at it, people will always matter. So, as a leader, just imbibe that. Okay, we are going to go to our theme number 5 on the next slide, the power of prioritization. I'm not supposed to have favorites, but this is my favorite one. So, again, I'm going to ask you to pause and think right now what your priorities are just for 10 seconds. Just in your mind, it could be work related, it could be, again, home related, it could be related to your community. Just think of a couple of priorities you have. All right. Now, let's talk about the power of prioritization. I'm going to cover this in two aspects here. One is I've already talked about the COVID situation quite a bit. And one of the things that's very important today is that companies need to fuel their own growth. So there's a study that was done that showed that high-tech companies, and high-tech is a sector I work with a lot, that the R&D spend, which is their research and development spend, is growing 2 times the rate of their revenue growth. Okay, while the ROI of the spend, which is your return of investment on this spend, has decreased by 60% over the past 30 years. So talk about pressure to correlate the spend to the outcome. So what becomes important? The toolings, the methods, the measures, the practices, all of those become important. So companies need to prioritize spend and find ways to fund it. Now, all of these things that become important, there are ways to streamline back office functions. IT modernization becomes key. AI-powered enterprises are a must. Machine learning is critical because you can streamline what you're doing. You can optimize the spend, but you can also get more accurate outcomes, more predictable outcomes. So leaders define their priorities based on today and their vision for tomorrow, and then they execute on it. So keep that in mind. So what is the one thing you will prioritize for yourself as a leader? I asked you to kind of think of what you are prioritizing today. But now that we've gone through this conversation, what will be the one thing you prioritize for yourself? It might be short term, it might be long term. Maybe you prioritize something that differentiates you from others or something that you have a passion for. It was interesting when I read that Thomas Jefferson's grave describes him as the author of the Declaration of the American Independence and the father of the University of Virginia, but there's no mention of his presidency. His other priorities and passions just outshone. So, what is the one thing you will prioritize for yourself as a leader? Think about that. All right. So, all that said, I'm going to conclude this power of prioritization with kind of a anecdote. And this is the reason I really love the power of prioritization, because I think it's powerful. I read this in this book called The Meditations from the Mat by Rolf Gates. And in this, the author read a study that shared that most homeless Americans drink every single night. And the author was really perplexed because the question is, how is that possible? How can homeless folks possibly afford that? And the answer was the power of prioritization. Roof over your head or no roof over your head. If drinking is your priority, you will find a way to make it happen. So, leaders, know and embrace the power of prioritization for yourself and your team, because whatever you prioritize, you will make that happen. All right. So, I really appreciate you guys listening to me. I've covered the themes, and now we're going to move over to our Q&A, and I'm going to hand it over to Renee to facilitate us. Thank you for being here.
Awesome, guys. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to give it a few minutes until see if we get people asking questions. And while that goes on, here, let me show you the screen. And here we go. You should be able to see some of the questions that people are asking. I'm pretty sure someone might have just gotten that question there too.
Okay, wonderful. So I can just start from the one on, could you share with us an example of a leader in your life career that helped inspire you? I will tell you, the one person that really um, well, inspiration and also I would say helped me was this one person who gave me one of the major negative feedbacks I've gotten in my life. It was so intense that to the point that I said thank you and walked away. And it was an area that I thought was my strength, by the way. And this is a good couple of decades back. But this person inspired me because he had the courage to give me the quote unquote bad news, in the sense he was giving me areas for development that he knew would be tough to give and for me to receive. So that's why he really inspired me. And I really to this day continue kind of trying my best to take care of our folks and give them the right feedback. And the other way he inspired me was basically I really stepped back and looked at that area for improvement and realized it really was a weakness when looked at it from that angle. And I had to improve on it. And I do think it generally now, unless he comes back, is a strength of mine. So someone who can take that time and give you the quote unquote bad news is someone that really you should appreciate. And that's the individual. He was a partner at Accenture. He's no longer with the firm, but that really inspired me. All right. Can you talk a little bit more about mentorship versus sponsorship and how do you find one? Um, Definitely. I think some of the tricky parts of a sponsor and mentor is it cannot be contrived. So it's kind of has to flow naturally while you are having those conversations with people. Either you click or you find a commonality and you're able to approach the individual. So a lot of it needs to happen naturally. But I would say keep it your ears and your eyes open for such opportunities. And a lot of times people will kind of take care of you. And this is going to sound bad, but it's the reality. If you're helping them with some of their objectives as well. So kind of look through that. It's a softer thing, but look at that alignment between yourself and someone you would like to see as a mentor or a sponsor, and how can you make that happen? Sponsors are harder because it's a louder thing. I said there has to be some alignment and they've got to have some vested interest in seeing you succeed. For the most part, I know people might debate that. Mentors are a little bit different. Again, it could be your neighbor, it could be your mother, it could be someone on your team who's junior to you. And so I think just asking would be good. So I'm assuming, Renee, I should go to the first question up top. Is that how I'm supposed to go? From the bottom.
Yeah, so I just highlighted that question. I see it was one of the recent ones that just came
Perfect.
up, and yeah.
Perfect. How to motivate a person who has really lot motivation for something specific. I tell you, I might myself go through these peaks and valleys. People assume, oh, everyone's on this permanent, I'm going to be motivated. One of the things I do for myself, and again, it may or may not work for you, so I really don't want to sound like I'm preaching because it's to each its own. But I personally give myself a break. And when I say break, doesn't mean I have to go on this amazing vacation. I just kind of give myself a break from that area. So recently I'm into yoga. I've done yoga for many, many decades. And I started doing some specific certifications, et cetera, right around that during COVID because I was feeling a little bit lost. And it was a great diversion, got me motivated back on track. I don't know if that's a diversion, but it did help me personally. All right, the next question. Well, they're going in faster than I can talk, so I'm going to have to be more succinct here. The role of leadership doesn't change with the new work from home format. How would you exert leadership in this situation? Great question. I do think leadership has different facets, and you guys yourselves defined those. And one of them was empathy, if I remember, someone put that, and I totally agree. How do you exert that? What does the situation require now? I think empathy is probably the biggest one. You've got team members maybe with younger kids at home. How do they make all that work? And so putting yourself in their shoes and kind of taking a little bit of a realistic attitude towards things goes a long way. And also realize everyone is in a tough place mentally, right? People could be worried about just our nation, the hatred in some areas. People could be worried about a elderly parent. So from a COVID angle. So it could be all kinds of mental stress that you don't see. And I would just say that empathy would go a long way in being a people person. Um, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing leaders today? Um, I do think it's tough to be a leader, although it's the best time, but it's tough to be a leader in the crisis. I did say, it's the best time to be a leader at the onset. So what's the biggest challenge? You don't, it's the unknown. It's not the norm. It's not tried and tested. So you have to kind of be a little bit of a person who'll take some risk in how you approach things. I think I gave quite a few examples of how people are doing things differently in today's world. So I would say the biggest challenge that leaders face today is being innovative. And by innovation, I just don't mean technology innovation, innovative in their approach. New business models, new reality, new mindset. How do you deal with that? And taking a little bit of risk around that is the biggest challenge. It's not your status quo. What are some things I can do to ensure that I'm growing as a leader? Great. I mean, we talked about some of the things. I think one of the real powerful ones there is continuous learning, being able to recognize which areas you want to kind of be the, I'm going to say expert, maybe that's the wrong word, but be your area and kind of hone in on that. As I said earlier, I think knowledge is power. So to me, that's the big thing, but a leader also carries people with them. So honing on that skills and having that empathy, it's a lot about people. It's about growing yourself, but it's really about the people and getting that end goal. So the things you could do is kind of learn, understand what areas you want to kind of be an expert in, and then I would say the last thing is always keep people first. As I said, people matter. So use the opportunities you get to make them grow. As a leader, how do you deliver bad news? By being empathetic. I always think about if someone was telling this to me, how would I feel? And frankly, the person I'm giving the news to might not have the same reaction as I would, but I do put myself in their position because I recognize that receiving bad news is also tough. And we aren't the saints that we'd be like, okay, tell me what you got. So being empathetic, I think, is probably the most important one. And I would still say don't shy from delivering news that would help the other person. And also helping them understand that you kind of helping them would be good if they're open to it at that point. There are disagreements on the team. What's the game plan? So there are a couple of game plans, I think, and I've been through this situation. I have large teams globally spread out, and we do have a lot of disagreements on things. I think one of the biggest, I would say, foundation of the game plan would be don't take it personally. So, if and remind your team of that, right? We could argue, debate, counter argue points, but it's not personal. It's about the topic at hand. And that's what makes this world and us in the business successful because we have a variety of opinions and that's what makes us diverse and whole. And so reminding the team of that as a foundational thing will help you kind of work through the disagreement. But there's no one game plan after that because it really depends on what the disagreement is about. But people need to not take it personal. What do you think are the biggest differences between a leader and a manager? Yeah, that's a good one. Actually, I was going to talk about leadership as not being a good manager, and I think the leader has that vision, right? I think that's the biggest key. The leader knows where they want to go. They have a outcome or a direction or a focus point, whereas a manager is more about kind of taking care of their people and kind of driving them something that's predetermined. By the way, you can be both, right? Because your manager doesn't mean you're not a leader. You can be both, but leader has that extra zing in my mind. In your opinion, what is one mistake that you see yourself and other leaders making? I think one big mistake is, and I do that, is sometimes believing you know it all. I think conviction is a good thing, but making that so pivotal that you think no other opinion matters, I think is a mistake. And we all fall in that trap, especially areas that we are really good at or we've been in forever, and it's like my way or the highway. And I think that's one mistake I see quite a lot. Egos come into play, etc. And I would say, myself included, that's one thing we want to eradicate as leaders. Wow, those were a lot of good questions there, Renee. I think that was wonderful. Um, more than I had expected. So I really appreciate the energy there.
No, it looks like it was awesome. Hopefully, maybe we'll see one or two questions coming in that maybe people will have to wrap it up. But in this meantime, I mean, if you have any closing thoughts that we could have for the audience.
Absolutely. So I will close by saying that, um, again, leadership, people will say there's science behind it, but there's a lot of art in my books. And it always comes with your exposure to different areas. And it comes with, a lot of learning from others and learning from your own mistakes. So, what we talked about today, again, are guidelines. You don't have to imbibe them exactly, but hopefully they help you kind of get some of those key characteristics in yourself so that you can, not only become an amazing leader today, but grow and build future leaders. All right, so I do see a question here. How do female and male leaders differ? I will risk being highly stereotypical if I answer that. But I so this is a dilemma. How do I not make it sound like everyone's made of the same mold, all females in one mold and males in the others? But I will say, the styles are different. I do see that. But they are not in areas that you would intuitively think. So, for example, I've read about things like unconscious bias. It's not that a male leader will have more than the female. It's unconscious, and I think both have equally. But I do think a lot of females tend to be a little bit more intuitive. But I will put a caveat there. A lot of the females who kind of worked hard, especially in the last 2-3 decades, not in exactly the current world, tend to harden up a bit over time. So sometimes they don't come across as being as soft. But I've noticed for the most part, they tend to be a little bit softer and more inclusive in their approach, but not one size fits all. And I've seen the others happen. So I know I didn't very elegantly answer that question because there probably aren't that many very, very specific differences that apply to everyone. Any possibility of getting eyes on your favorite books list? I do love reading. One of my favorite ones right now is How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. It's a brilliant book because it talks about how Da Vinci had all these amazing characteristics. And in this book, they consider him to be I think, what is it, like the most intelligent person of all times. And they have Einstein as number 10 on that list, if that gives you perspective. But it just talks about some of his personality traits that we can, by the way, all learn from and put in our lives. One example I'll give to you real quick is what they call chaos endurance in that book. I love that because that's our life right now, chaos. And if you look at the Mona Lisa and things he did, at the risk of going a little bit longer on this one, and I think it's kind of interesting. Mona Lisa has this style that he calls sfumata, which is basically going up in fumes, which basically is, it's not a clear outline, it's a little bit blurry. And his perspective is life is like that. So you need to be able to live through the blurred lines. Everything's not going to be perfectly defined for you in life. And so that, for the reason I just mentioned, is my favorite book of all time. So if that helps any.
Perfect. So it looks like that's all of the questions for today.
Great. Again, really appreciate everyone's time. And I would love to get some feedback online through this group if, hopefully this added value.
Yes, so I also do believe that the Slido will provide a survey at the end. If you guys have questions, comments, concerns, anything, I'll make that available. If not, I'll send it through the meetup page for those people that are watching outside from 42. To the students, I'll share it via Slack. So please stay tuned. We'll love feedback, and anything is greatly accepted here. But Chetna, thank you
Thank you.
once again so much for joining us. Like I said in the beginning, and you said throughout the presentation, these are very difficult times, but we're very glad that we're still able to do this with technology that's available to us right now, and amazing stories on how to be a great leader.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.